In a previous video, I talked about how to find your own wild clay. Finding the clay is just the first step toward actually being able to use it successfully. The second step is processing the clay. When we say processing clay, we're just talking about removing non-clay stuff from what you dig up. That can be organic matter, like leaves and twigs and roots, or inorganic stuff that reduces your clay's plasticity, like sand, silt, and stones. After these things are removed, finishing up processing entails getting your clay to a good workable consistency and then aging it to maximize its plasticity. There's a wet method and a dry method. They both achieve the same thing. In either case, you'll need a couple basic pieces of kit, some buckets, a bit of mesh screen, water, a mixing implement, and a drying implement. Plaster or cotton will do. Before you start, take note of your clay's traits. Especially if you're testing multiple clays, it'll change color when you add water, and then again when you dry it. And you're going to be removing stuff that is identifying out in the wild. So take note of its color, its texture, and where you got it from, so that if your clay turns out to be really great, you'll be able to find it again. The wet method entails adding enough water to your clay to make it a runny slip. The more water you add, the easier it is to mix together and then pour and sieve it, but the longer it takes to dry again. I found that if I have a bucket half full of clay, I need to cover the clay with water plus a few inches. Depending on how big your chunks of clay are, you may need to let it sit and hydrate for longer, or even break those clumps up with a shovel or your hand. When everything has sat for long enough to be soft, the quick way is to mix it with a paint mixer or similar drill attachment. But just like a stand mixer helps in baking, it's great, but you could do this by hand with your actual hands and maybe a sturdy mixing implement. You may find that your first attempt at mixing it doesn't get all of the chunks out, so add a little bit more water, let it sit, and mix it again later on. Now let it sit a while longer so that the bigger particles settle to the bottom. This makes sieving easier because you won't block up the holes of your mesh right away with all those bigger particles of stone or sand. And then simply pour it through the mesh. You can get an old window screen, often for free or maybe $1 at Habitat for Humanity Restore, or use a kitchen sieve. Anything like this is fine. The smaller the holes, the more non-clay stuff you remove, and the more clay you'll be left with in the end. Depending on your purposes, that could be good or bad. For raku, for example, you actually want some sand in your clay. Again, a future video will go into detail about what kind of clay body you want for different purposes. In the meantime, check out my Instagram for some of my own experiments with raku clay bodies. Now you need to dry the clay again. The most common way I've seen this done, and what I've done myself sometimes, is to pour your slip into some cotton. People use pillowcases, but you can also pick up bulk fabric, again maybe at a thrift store, and tie it up like a cartoon hobo's knapsack. The idea is just that the clay won't pass through the fabric, but the water will wick out over time, leaving behind a drier and drier clay. This process takes days, or if it's cold and damp, even longer. I've found that it's best to be patient and don't disturb it. If you do, you're just mixing all the water and clay together and slowing down that wicking process. If you can, hang your dripping clay in the sun or wind to speed things along. And if you happen to have a studio with a plaster wedging table, once the clay is dry enough to slop out, you can spread it on the plaster to speed up the last bit of drying. When your clay is the right consistency, it actually won't stick to the cotton anymore and it'll all come right out. Here I just tie a slip knot around this pillowcase so that it cinches closed and then hang it over a tree branch. Now, the dry method takes more active effort, but it can be good too. I dug this particular clay after a period of dry, warm weather, so it was already dry and in relatively small chunks. So it wasn't too bad to sieve through this mesh and then wet it to the right consistency right away. Again, this takes more actual time to rub the clay back and forth over the mesh screen, but it is a bit less messy and it gives you a workable clay faster because you don't have to dry it again. Now, in either case, it is a good idea to age your clay after processing. So wedge it up really well, wrap it in a moist towel, and then store it in a sealed container, a trash can or a lidded bucket or whatever. This allows the clay to, 1, gradually become homogeneously saturated so that there are no dry clumps, and 2, to grow some natural bacteria that secrete a colloidal gel that will improve your clay's plasticity. A bit of mold growth is totally fine and even good for plasticity. Potters for ages have sworn by the importance of aging clay. In any case, it is a great idea at this point to take out some small samples of your clays for testing before even aging it. So check out my next video for how to test your wild clay in order to determine its best uses. This is an essential process to make sure you get the most out of your clay and avoid disasters. And that's really it. There's not a lot to delve into here the way I normally like to do, but the biggest suggestion I can make is be patient. Start this process well before you want to work with the clay so that it has time to hydrate, then dry again, then age. Otherwise, take this general principle and use whatever you've got on hand to make it work. Stick around this channel for future videos on how to test your clay and then how to use the results of your tests to create the ideal clay body for whatever your purpose is. Thanks for watching.
Always fill your divot.